So hope you all are well and keeping safe. My name is Shantanu Burwa and I welcome you all to my channel. Recently I met a C-level executive at Kaiser Permanente. His name is Yazdi Bagley. Yazdi is responsible for shared services organization within Kaiser Permanente, and also the CIO and the CDO organization rolls up to him. During my conversation with him, I learned that there are two books he deeply recommends his team to read. Not only that, the principles outlined in the book, he wants his team to imbibe within themselves and also follow it to the hilt. So I got intrigued and I read both the books. The first book is The Goal, and the second is Rules of Flow. The Goal is written about 30 years back, and interestingly, the second book, Rules of Flow, is written by Goldratt, the author's daughter, in the year 2022. This video, I'm going to talk about Rules of Flow in details, and hopefully you like what you hear and provide me your feedback and comment whenever you get a moment. Before I begin, I also want to express my sincere gratitude to Mr. Yazdi Bagley for introducing me to such wonderful books. I really enjoyed reading it, and I'm sure it is going to deeply help me in the future program and projects. Rules of Flow. What is this book all about? This book is for those who are managing projects or who are into projects, particularly in situation when you have many projects to run, many priorities to look after, and then as you're running those projects, if you're in a situation when you always have project overrun, budget overrun situation, your customer is unhappy, you're always frustrated, you're running between one project to another, you have projects which are dragging you down, customers yelling at you. If you're in a situation like that, this video is for you. Again, as I always say, while this video can help you with some of my learnings, please read the book. The book is really interesting and written quite well in terms of how the flow of the entire book comes together. So let's begin. There are about 8 lessons I have learned from the book. The first lesson that I learned is triaging. So what happens is when you have many projects to execute and many things to do in life, typically when you're working on all of those, it may so happen that some may work, some may not. Some important projects will suffer because of the others, because you're running many projects at the same time. What triaging does is it helps you to analyze what is important for you and what is not. And what is not important for you, take it off the list. Don't even give it a low priority, just take it off the list. The word triaging, as the author explains, comes from the ER room, the emergency room in a hospital setup. So in a hospital setup, when there are limited resources and many people are coming who needs urgent attention, you have to prioritize. You have to see that who is really, really important to be taken care of first. And then you need to ensure that the one that you do not have to take care of, you can triage it out. Example that is taken in the book is as an ambulance rolls over to an hospital. As the people walks out of the ambulance, they may be all covered with blood because there's one person injured, the others may be trying to treat him or hold him, and the blood is on them as well. If you do not think and put all of them to the treatment process, soon you'll realize that you have wasted costly resource on people you should not have. So triage is all about, if you have a list of projects or a list of things to do, what you can cut off completely so that you can focus on what is important. Now, as you and I know, not always it is possible, particularly if you're in a situation where you have many customers to manage. You may have customers, projects all lined up, and how do you say that one is important, one is not? Because end of the day, they are all your customers, and taken all of them on your role or on your task list to do. And that's where the second rule applies, which is multitasking. Interestingly, before I read this book, I thought multitasking is a good thing. It's a skill we should be all proud of, where you can manage many projects at the same time or do many things at the same time. I, at the past, used to read many books at the same time, and I used to feel very proud of it. But after learning from this book, which is the second lesson I learned, I thought that multitasking, the way I was doing, is not right. So the bottom line is multitasking is not good. Multitasking is bad. Why? Because when you multitask, many things happen. First of all, you are providing your attention to many things at the same time, and by doing so, you're not able to focus on everything together. And by the time you are coming back to one of the things that you focused before and you shifted your attention from that to the other one within the multitasking environment, you lose your context. And when you lose the context, the start time is quite high. And that's what happens in multitasking. You spend more time in finishing your project. So the second rule is to not do multitasking if possible. Do one thing at a time, finish it, then go to the next one. Or if you cannot do that, minimize the multitasking to the level that you can manage it well. It is true that I completely agree to this phenomena, and I can relate it back to when I was to read many books at the same time. I used to read one book, I'll read 2 chapters to it, maybe for 2 days, and then I'll move to the second book, read another 2 chapters before I go to the first book which I was reading before. And by the time I go to the first book, I lose the context, and it takes some time for me to appreciate where I was, and sometimes I may have to go a chapter back to read again to appreciate the book, what I was reading, so I can understand the flow well. And in the due process, what I'm doing is there are many balls up in the air, in this case 3 books if I'm taking that example, and I'm going back and forth, and setting context is a very costly affair. And imagine if you're running projects, if you have to reset your context time and again, you're going to lose quite a lot of time. So the second lesson I've learned is if you cannot triage, which is you cannot take things off your list if everything is important, at least multitask to a level that you can manage. Now, how do you do that? Let's say you have 10 projects and you realize that you can effectively multitask only up to 3, and beyond that, it becomes very painfully disturbing to you because you lose context and all those examples I gave you. What you need to do in that occasion, as the book recommends, is you need to bring your list of 10 to 4 at a time, and rest all you have to ignore. Finish those 4 and then take the next 4 and then go to the next 2. So what you're doing is you are saving your time from context switching, and also you can focus on a few and get it finished faster. If you draw it on a map, you can see that if you lay over all the different projects at the same time, and if you keep switching between them, you lose context, how much time you lose. At the end of the day, you are not completing any project on time, and also losing time because of context switching. The second lesson I've learned is multitasking is bad. Try to minimize it. If you cannot completely minimize, try to go to a point where you can manage it well, and then you finish those and you take the other project once those are done accordingly. Okay. Let's go to the third lesson that I've learned, which is a very critical and important one, which is known as Fullkit according to the author. The Fullkit is a situation that, let's say you started a project. I take the same example. You decided that you had 10 projects. You can do only 4 effectively at a time. And when I'm saying it could be you and your team. You can do 4 at a time effectively. And you start those projects so that you can complete them on a time. And you're downstream into the project, and you realize in between that you have certain resources that you're waiting on, without which you cannot start or go any forward. In that situation, what you have done is that you have paused your project because you do not have certain inputs that you need. That maybe has to come from a customer or from a different unit or so on and so forth. So what Fullkit basically means is that before you start a project, make sure that you have everything outlined and aligned so that you have everything to go with. And then you start the project, you start the program, you do not have to halt because you're looking for a part or for a solution or for a requirement or for something from someone else to complete their project. So that is Fullkit all about. So if I want to rehash the whole thing, you first try to do triage. If you cannot do triage, you minimize the multitask. Then you minimize the multitask, taking a few tasks to be completed first. The third lesson is when you're doing that, you make sure that the projects you're starting, you have everything in your hand which you can take to complete the projects. The fourth and a very important factor is reuse and repurpose and rework. Time and again, when we do projects, there are things which we keep repeating, right? Example, if you're working for a IT coding company, there are certain code which you'll be repeating time and again. And rework is a very costly affair. If you can standardize on certain aspects, if you can get templates on certain aspect, in this case code, or you may have a Word document or even an Excel sheet or a template to do projects, what you can do is you can repurpose them time and again, so that when you start a project, you at least have a base already ready, so you can avoid wasting time in looking for resources. So that's another very big lessons learned. So as you try to multitask, as you make sure you have a full kit available, also try to see if you have some starting point already available for you, so you can leapfrog or bootstrap at a quite faster pace. Now comes the next one, which is a fifth one, which is known as right dosages. It is also empirically important that if you are in a multitasking model, first of all, you're trying to avoid it, but if you're minimizing, let's say in our example, to 4 programs or 4 projects, you have to make sure that as you're focusing on that one job out of the 4 at a time, you give enough dosage or you go enough deep inside it so that you do not have to do context switching as happened in the example I've given before. So go a little deeper and make sure that you just don't brush and go to the next project and then go to the next one, then go to the next one. If you do that, you are not going towards the completion cycle in a faster pace, and you're not able to give the provided attention required to move the project forward accordingly. Beyond dosages, there are 2 more things that I wanted to highlight. The next one is synchronization. Synchronization is a very important aspect. In any project, there are dependencies, right? So there are certain things that you need to wait for before you can start certain projects. So you need to synchronize your entire activities. Let's say if I take our example, there are 4 projects that you're doing at the same time out of the 10, and then you had the full kit, you have given the right dosages so that you can progress the project accordingly. But now comes the synchronization part. Let's say in one project there are 10 tasks that you need to do. You need to find that out of those 10 tasks, which is the one task which takes the longest time. You have to make sure that that task is started early and that task is done at a particular period of time, so that a dependent tasks are not waiting on them. And as you finish a dependent task, you have to ensure that they all come together. And that's where the point of what the author called as avoid local efficiency to global flow is important, which predominantly means that if you streamline your 10 tasks at individual local level and you optimize them, but you forget that the entire 10 tasks has to come together to finish a project, and you do not emphasize enough to synchronizing your entire activities around that one longest pole in the 10, what happens is that you may do one task effectively, but it will be again waiting because the longest pole in the 10 is not fixed. So that's what you need to do. You need to synchronize around the longest path, look at the bottlenecks, and ensure that they are all treated equally, or at least in time, so that by the time you finish your subtask, the longest task is also finished, so that you can move and go in a flow, as the book indicates. Go in a flow to ensure that nothing is stopping, you're always in a flow so that you're not wasting resources. The last but not the least very important point to note that I've learned is there are certain resources which are very costly. And those costly resources, you do not want them to wait because they are expensive to you, and you want to make sure they are fully utilized. And sometimes they are waiting because they were waiting on inputs, they're waiting in different other aspects. So if you have the most costly resource in a project, make sure that they are used effectively and fully. In the IT context, I will say, for example, an architect is a very costly resource if I'm talking about resource standpoint. And make sure that if there are 4 projects, as you say, at the same time you're trying to attack, how do you utilize them so that they can do their job deep enough for each of the project and then move to the next one, rather than they waiting and wasting their resource for your task to be done. So you have to make sure that you plan those things accordingly so that your project can go in a flow. I deeply learned from this 8 lessons. And again, if I want to summarize it, if you can avoid certain low tasks which are not important to you, triage them. If you cannot, prioritize them. You prioritize and focus on very few which you can multitask. Again, when you're multitasking, you need to ensure that within that multitask level, you have a manageable amount of projects. Within those, you are trying to ensure that you have the enough amount of dosages to that so that you can go deeper. Synchronize around the longest pole in the tent. Make sure that the flow is aligned accordingly. Focus on rework wherever you can and standardize as accordingly, Before you start the project, have the full kit ready for you. And then as you do so, focus on the global flow, not in the local efficiency. Your entire project has to flow, and as you do that, also make sure that your costly resources are well used. So those are the lessons I've learned. I hope you liked what you heard, and I look forward to hearing back from you. Thank you once again for listening. Take care now. Bye.